Hi, you're listening to Bonus Points, the official podcast of Mr. Astel's theology class. Join us as we put out into the deep and explore the world of theology and beyond. Today we're talking about this show and what it's going to be about. Let's begin. Well, it is finally here. Some of you know that I've been talking about starting this for the better part of a year now, and I figured that the new year is as good a time as any to actually do it. I can't go on without thanking the students who inspired this, especially the members of the class of 2024. This show wouldn't exist without you. Well, if it turns out not to be any good, we know who to blame. I want to take this first short episode, to lay out a little bit of my vision for the show and what I hope to do with it. So if nothing else, it might give you a better idea about what to expect for episode 2. Let's start with my target audience. You know from all your English classes that effective communication, whether it's a paper or a podcast, begins with a clear understanding of your audience. Who are you doing this for? Thankfully for me, that part was easy. I'm making this show primarily for my students. Lots of people who start podcasts want to be the next chart topper. They imagine thousands of listeners, hundreds of dollars in ad revenue, subscribers, patrons. Don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to any of that. But I've set my sights on a more modest goal. I want to share what I'm passionate about with my students, and there's no way that can all fit in a class period. At the same time, though, I hope that this can be an effective way to reach out beyond the classroom as well. Maybe it's as simple as you sharing an episode with your friends, your family, as a way of saying, hey, listen to what we're doing in class, or the things we're not doing in class, but that are related to what we're doing in class. Maybe you're the parent of one of my students and you want to be able to talk to your son or daughter about what they're learning. So whether you're one of my students or not, my hope for you with this show is that you learn something new and that you come away with a deeper appreciation for just how much cool stuff there is to learn in theology. My motivation to start this show is the same as my motivation for getting into teaching in the first place, because we have a God who loves us and who wants us to know that love. You know, my life changed when that truth became a reality for me. I felt like the disciples on the road to Emmaus. So this happens on Easter Sunday. They're walking away from Jerusalem. They're going to Emmaus, and they encounter Christ on the road. But they don't recognize him. That happens a lot after the resurrection. People see Christ, they don't recognize him. And as they walk along, Jesus explains the scriptures. He goes through the entire Old Testament and shows all the things that were pointing to him. And he explains, why is it that the Messiah had to be crucified? Nobody was really expecting that. But if you look back in the prophets, it's all there. And then they get to the end of their journey, and Jesus appears to continue on. He looks like he's going to keep going. And so they say, please stay, have dinner with us. And it's in that, when he takes the bread, says the blessing, breaks it, and gives it, that's when they recognize him. They recognize him in the breaking of the bread, and then, of course, he vanishes, as Jesus often does after the resurrection. But the disciples look at each other and say, were not our hearts burning within us when he opened the scriptures to us? And that really was my experience. I had the scriptures open to me, and my heart burned within me. I can only hope to share that fire with you. So I know for a good bit of my life, especially up until maybe like the middle of high school, I took the faith for granted. I questioned it at points, but I went to church because that's what we do. We go to church. But I never really let the truths of the faith become anything more than facts to know, something to know so that I can do well on religion tests. And then I read a book by Scott Hahn, who, if you are one of my students, you hear that name all the time in class. He wrote a book called The Lamb's Supper. And what this book did was it mostly focused on the book of Revelation, but it connected the scriptures to the Mass. And what I saw was that all the different words and actions of the Mass weren't arbitrary. They weren't just there because somebody decided that Mass had to be an hour and we had to do something. Everything in the Mass pointed to heaven. Everything in the Mass pointed to a heavenly reality. And he showed how all throughout the scriptures, from Melchizedek in the book of Genesis all the way up through the heavenly liturgy described in Revelation, all of it is there in the Mass, and all of it is real, all of it is alive. And it was those connections that made it come to life for me. And that's still one of my favorite things in theology, is finding those connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and within the Old Testament and between the scriptures and the Mass. And so I hope to keep sharing that. I want to keep sharing that fire. And I hope that you, like me, like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, can say, were not our hearts burning within us? And of course, just like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, I hope that we can also encounter Christ in the breaking of the bread. Anyway, back to the show. Or back to talking about the show, I should say. I've decided that I'm not going to set myself a strict recording schedule. I know some podcasts try to have a new episode every week, every day. I'm not going to be that strict about it. I'm hoping to record frequently, but I have a list of topics that I think would make good episodes. I have a few ideas for guests to happen on the show, for a few ideas for guests to have on the show. I'm going to make that happen whenever I can, and I'm going to try not to go too long between episodes, but I'm not going to say much beyond that. And if you couldn't tell already, I'm only going to do one take of this, unless I have some sort of colossal screw-up. My plan is to just go with it. You know, when I'm in class, if I stumble over my words, I don't get a redo. You had to hear it anyway. So I hope that this show can capture some of that same energy, and hopefully some of the other energy as well. Anyway, when it makes sense, I'll try to have, if I have a topic that goes along with something that one of my classes is doing, like maybe it builds on that, or it goes a little bit deeper, it goes in a different direction, I'd like to try to release that episode around that time. But we'll see what happens. You know, sometimes I'm just going to pick the topic that I feel like talking about. So if you've listened this far, you've earned a sneak peek at episode 2, or at least what I'm probably going to do for episode 2. I would love to take a look at the theology, especially the moral theology, in one of my favorite movies, Jurassic Park. What would a moral theologian have to say about cloning extinct animals like dinosaurs? What would a moral theologian have to say about one of the themes, one of the motifs of Jurassic Park is this idea of control. What can we take from that? And we'll see what else I can find. But I'm really excited. I think it'd be great to do my first real episode on one of my favorite movies. Anyway. I'm not setting a recording schedule. I'm also not going to set a normal episode length. This one is maybe on the shorter side. Hard to say right now. I hope that each episode is as long as your attention span is, and not a second longer. So that might be different depending on the topic. But all of this whole show is really a supplement to what we're doing in class. It's supposed to build on what we do in class and to cover a lot of those interesting things that we would never have time to talk about in class. I would love to take time in class to go over some of these things, to share some of these things, but there's never enough time. One of the first culture shocks for me when I started teaching was, on paper, it looks like you have all this time, 40 minutes a day, 75 minutes on block days, day in, day out, 180 days of school. That seems like a lot of time, but I don't know where it all goes. So that's actually the logic behind the name of the show. I'm calling it bonus points because what I hope to do is share with you some interesting points, some interesting concepts, some interesting ideas that we wouldn't have time to talk about in class. So there are bonus points. And I know some of you who've heard the name of the show have already asked me, do we get bonus points for listening to it? My answer every time somebody asked me that was, there's only one way to find out. I'm only half kidding when I say that I might give you bonus questions on tests based on the show. I don't know yet. We'll see. Oh man, guys, I'm excited. This is awesome. I think there is a lot of potential here. I'm looking forward to taking this journey with you. If you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you know somebody who you think would enjoy a particular episode, pass it along. If you have ideas for future topics, let me know. Until next time, I'm praying for you. Please pray for me. I'm Mr. Astle. God bless.